The boundary waters are supposed to be beautiful, silent, untouched, the kind of place people visit to find peace. But there's a difference between silence and stillness. And out here, the stillness feels alive. My name is Mark Hensley, 38 years old, and for most of my life I've worked to save others, animals, hikers, stranded campers, until one rescue went wrong. 2 volunteers froze to death under my command. I left Duluth after that, left everything. I told myself I'd find redemption in isolation. The Park Service offered me a winter posting, Outpost Epsilon, a research and observation post in the far north of Minnesota, less than 30 miles from the Canadian border. It was the kind of assignment nobody wanted, snowed in for months, no signal, no visitors. But for me, it was perfect. The drive out there took 8 hours on frozen dirt roads. My truck tires crunched over ice as the pines closed in around me, tall and black, their branches bowed under snow. By the time I saw the cabin, a lonely wooden structure on a rise overlooking a half-frozen lake, the sun had already dipped behind the horizon. Chief Ranger David Marlowe was waiting for me. His face was pale and raw, the skin around his eyes cracked from cold and sleeplessness. He didn't shake my hand when I arrived, just handed me a worn brass compass that looked older than both of us. "Keep this close," he said. His voice rasped like gravel. "If it starts spinning, don't wait. Run back inside and lock the doors." I almost laughed. Thought maybe he was joking about magnetic interference or frostbite delirium. But he didn't smile. When I asked why he was leaving so suddenly, he said only, "The forest doesn't like new voices. You'll learn to speak quieter." As he trudged off toward his snowmobile, I stood on the porch, watching him vanish into the white. The trees loomed still as stone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That night, I logged my first entry in the station book. Temperature, wind direction, aurora visibility. Standard stuff. I poured myself cheap coffee, opened the logbook, and wrote my name. Ranger Mark Hensley, Outpost Epsilon. Then I heard it. A faint giggle, carried on the wind. High-pitched, soft. The sound of a child playing somewhere in the dark. It came from across the frozen lake. I turned off the lamp and pressed my face to the window. Nothing. Only trees, black against the snow. But the laughter came again. And this time, it said my name. I found the envelope taped to the inside of the door just after dawn. Yellowed paper, sealed with brittle wax marked by the old national park emblem. I don't remember it being there when I came the night before. Across the front, written in fading blue ink, were 6 words that immediately sent a chill through me. Outpost Epsilon, Survival Directives. Inside was a single folded page, the corners soft and smudged by years of use. The handwriting was uneven, as if written by a shaking hand. The title was underlined 3 times in red pencil. Outpost Epsilon, Rules of Conduct. Never touch any object you find in the woods with your bare hands. Use the provided tongs or gloves. Some things aren't meant to be held. Carry your compass at all times. If the needle spins, drop everything and return to the cabin immediately. Do not look behind you. If you hear a child laughing after sundown, injure yourself immediately, enough to bleed. Pain reminds you that you're still real. Do not leave the cabin between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. No emergency is worth the cost. If the forest becomes silent, completely silent, speak your name aloud once. If you hear it echoed, leave before dawn. When the frost on the window starts melting from the outside, it means something's breathing near the glass. Don't look. If you find a second compass anywhere, destroy it. You're not supposed to have 2. At the bottom of the page, written in smaller, hurried handwriting, almost carved into the paper, was a final line that didn't follow the neat format of the rest. 12 rangers gone. The forest keeps count. I sat there at the kitchen table, the list trembling slightly in my hand, the faint hiss of the propane heater filling the silence. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or feel insulted. It had to be some kind of tradition, A cruel joke passed from one ranger to the next. The woods were old, sure, but ghosts, voices, frost that breathes. I figure Marlowe, or whoever came before him, was just trying to scare the newbies. Superstition and isolation can do strange things to a man, especially this far north. Still, the paper didn't look like a prank. It looked old, like it had been handled too many times. The ink on rule number 3, the one about the laughter, was darker, fresher, as though it had been rewritten more recently than the others. That detail stuck with me all morning. Around noon, I went through the supply locker, and sure enough, there was a pair of iron tongs, thick gloves, and 2 identical compasses. One was the brass one Marlowe had given me. The other, smaller, had initials scratched into the back. DM. David Marlowe. I stared at them both for a long time, turning them over in my hands. The smaller one looked newer, less worn. I thought about rule number 7. Then I laughed under my breath and tossed it into a drawer. Later that afternoon, I radioed Marlowe, or tried to. All I got was static. The frequency wasn't dead. I could hear the faint pulse of something on the other end, almost rhythmic, like breathing between bursts of static. I switched it off. That evening, I pinned the rules to the cabin wall above the desk. I didn't want to forget them, not because I believed them, but because they were unsettling. There's something about being told what not to do that gnaws at the back of your mind. When night came, the temperature dropped hard, and the window glass frosted over. I watched the ice crawl up the pane like thin veins. Then I noticed something strange. The frost near the bottom, the part closest to where I was sitting, had begun to melt from the outside, and I swear for half a second, I heard something faint, a slow exhale, right behind the glass. For the first week, Outpost Epsilon was just what I needed, silent, uneventful, and punishingly cold. I shoveled snow, checked the traps, filed my daily reports, and listened to the wind tear through the pines. The forest had a kind of rhythm to it, an endless whispering that filled every quiet moment. By day it was peaceful. By night it felt wrong. The first strange thing happened on the 7th night. It was 12:47 a.m. I remember because I'd just written the time in the logbook when I heard it. 3 knocks on the window behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze, pen still in hand. No one was supposed to be out there. Supply runs only came on Mondays, and it was Thursday. The frost on the window began to melt, thin rivulets of water tracing down from outside. That detail twisted something deep in my gut. I thought about Rule 6. When the frost on the window starts melting from the outside, it means something's breathing near the glass. Don't look. So I didn't. I turned off the lamp and backed away until my shoulders touched the far wall. The knocking stopped. The silence afterward wasn't normal silence. It was absolute. No wind. No wood creaks. Not even the faint ticking of the heater. Just nothing. I waited maybe a minute, then another. Finally, the heater hissed back to life, and I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I wrote the incident down in the logbook, half to make it real and half to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined it. I didn't sleep that night. 2 nights later, I took the snowmobile out for a patrol run. The trees here grow too close together. Tall black spines nodded against the sky. The world felt smaller than it should, like the forest pressed in just a little more every hour. Around 11:30, I checked the compass Marlowe had given me. The needle spun once, then twice. Then it wouldn't stop. I frowned and tapped it. The metal casing buzzed faintly against my glove. The air around me had gone heavy, dense, as though the forest was holding its breath. Rule 2 flashed through my mind. If the needle spins, drop everything and return to the cabin. Don't look behind you. I didn't. At least, not right away. But curiosity's a hard thing to kill. I took 1 step, then another. The snow under my boots crunched too loud, too sharp. Then suddenly nothing. The sound just vanished. Every creature in the forest, every gust of wind, gone. I realized I couldn't even hear myself breathe. That's when I remembered Rule 5. If the forest becomes silent, speak your name aloud once. If you hear it echoed, leave before dawn. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. Still, I said it, low and steady. Mark Hensley. The sound seemed to hang in the air for a moment, swallowed by the dark. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind the trees, my name came back. Mark Hensley. My pulse kicked hard. The echo was perfect. Too perfect. I hadn't shouted. I'd whispered. Yet the voice came back louder. Closer. I stood frozen for a long time, watching the tree line, the compass still spinning wildly in my hand. Then, very quietly, the voice spoke again. Mark. It wasn't an echo anymore. When I made it back to the cabin, the compass needle was still spinning, though slower now, like it was winding down. My gloves were stiff with frost, but when I peeled them off, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Faint black streaks on my palms, like soot or ash, though I hadn't touched anything. That night, I burned a page from the logbook, the one with the entry about the knocking. It wasn't part of the rules, but it felt right. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound that took a moment to identify. Laughter. Soft. Far off. Like a child's. It floated through the trees, rising and falling with the wind. For a long time, I sat in the dark listening to it, until I realized the pattern wasn't random. The laughter came in pairs, matching my heartbeat exactly. I wrapped my hand around the compass. The needle was spinning again. I thought about Rule 3. If you hear a child laughing after sundown, injure yourself immediately. I didn't move. I couldn't. Outside, the laughter shifted, stretching into something else, a low hum, almost like breathing. And then, underneath it, a voice I recognized. A man's. Marlos. He whispered through the fog. You're one of them now. It happened on my 3rd week, the night I broke Rule 3. The day had been uneventful. A clear sky, steady frost. Even the wind seemed to sleep. I spent the evening cataloging animal tracks and radioing HQ, though no one ever responded anymore. By midnight, the forest was so still it felt hollow, like the air had been drained out of it. Then came the sound I'd been dreading. Faint, lilting laughter echoing through the trees. A child's laughter. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks. But then it came again, closer this time, high-pitched, musical, bouncing through the still air. Mark. I froze. Come play. Every instinct screamed at me to follow the rule. Injure yourself immediately. Enough to bleed. Pain meant reality. Pain meant I was still here. But there was something about that voice. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It sounded like a real child. Lost, scared, calling for help. I hesitated too long. Curiosity won. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was colder than before, biting through my parka like glass. The snow crunched under my boots, echoing too loud in the silence. The forest loomed black and endless. The trees packed so tight they seemed to grow into one another. I followed the sound toward the clearing behind the cabin, the same place where I'd found Marlowe's boot print weeks earlier. Mark. The voice was right ahead now, just beyond a fallen pine. My flashlight beam trembled as I raised it. Something was crouched in the snow, small, human-shaped, maybe 4 feet tall. Its back was to me, hunched and still. Hey, I called out, instantly regretting it. The figure twitched. Slowly it turned. For a second, my mind refused to process what I was looking at. The face, if you could call it that, was smooth, blank like skin stretched over bone. No eyes, no nose, no ears. Just one long slit from cheek to cheek, a mouth impossibly wide. The thing tilted its head, and the slit split open, revealing rows of 2 small teeth. Then it smiled, and laughed. It was my laugh. The sound ripped through me, identical in tone and rhythm, like I was hearing a recording of myself. I stumbled back, fumbling for the flare gun clipped to my belt. The thing crawled forward on all fours, jerking in sharp, unnatural bursts, its limbs bending wrong, its fingers long and black against the snow. "Stop," I said, or maybe begged. It didn't, so I fired. The flare burst through the dark with a crack, painting the trees in red fire. The creature screamed, a hollow, distorted version of my own voice. Then it vanished into the tree lean, leaving nothing but the hiss of burning magnesium. I slammed the cabin door shut and threw the lock, chest heaving, ears ringing. The forest outside was dead quiet again, but that silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like waiting. I stayed up until dawn, clutching the rifle and staring at the window, half expecting the frost to melt again. It didn't. When the light finally broke, I stepped outside to see if I'd imagined it all. The flare casing was still there, half buried in the snow. The trail of prints I'd made was clear. But then I saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, covering the cabin door and siding. Small, child-sized, pressed deep into the wood, frozen solid. Each one perfectly formed, each one facing inward. And they weren't all the same. Some had too many fingers. Others had none at all. I took one step back, while rising in my throat. Then something caught my eye, in the snow near the tree lean. A toy, a tiny wooden horse. Old, hand-carved. I knew better, but I still crouched to look. The horse's eyes were burned out, blackened holes staring into the snow. Rule 1 flashed through my mind. Never touch any object you find in the woods with your bare hands. I was wearing gloves, but even through the leather, the wood was warm, almost pulsing. I dropped it instantly and sprinted back inside. The compass on the table was spinning so fast I hummed. I didn't sleep that day, or the next night, or the one after that. By the fourth night, I started hearing it again. The laughter, distant at first, then closer. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was two, and they were laughing together. The day after the second night of laughter, I decided to clean the supply room, mostly to keep my hands busy and stop my mind from unraveling. The cabin had a way of amplifying every sound, every creak. You could go mad just listening to yourself breathe. The supply room was a cramped space in the back of the cabin, filled with rusted tools, oil drums, and paperwork yellowed with age. While moving a stack of weather logs, I noticed a metal box wedged behind a loose panel in the wall. It was heavy, covered in frost and dust. Scratched across the lid were the words, "Ranger Lawrence, 1978. I'd seen that name before. It was listed in the personnel records in HQ. Missing, presumed dead. Inside the box were photographs, reports, and an old cassette recorder. The photos showed Rangers standing in front of this same cabin, Outpost Epsilon, but the trees behind them looked wrong. They bent inward, like they were leaning to listen. There was also a notebook, its pages warped and darkened with water damage. I flipped through it and found short, frantic entries. Voices in the wind again. Sounded like me. The compass won't stop spinning. It only points toward the lake now. The thing in the woods can't make its own sounds. It takes hours. At the bottom of the box was a cassette tape labeled in faded ink. Boundary Waters Incident Report. I didn't hesitate. Maybe part of me already knew I shouldn't, but curiosity had its claws in me by then. I slid it into the player and hit play. The tape hissed for several seconds before a woman's voice came through. Strained, shaking, terrified. "This is Ranger Ellen Lawrence, recording from Outpost Epsilon. It's not an animal. It's not human either. It mimics sound, memory, identity. It learns you." The sound of static bled into her breathing. Then she whispered, "We thought the rules were to keep us safe. But they're not safety. They're contracts. It needs permission to enter. And the rules, they keep us giving it little pieces." I felt my throat tighten. The air in the cabin grew cold again. On the tape, Ellen's voice grew faint, almost resigned. "Every ranger that breaks a rule doesn't vanish. They get taken, copied. The forest fills with versions of them. Voices, shadows, memories. She went silent for a few seconds. Then, softly, she said, "Don't break the pattern. Once it knows your voice, it never forgets." The tape ended with a faint knock, once, twice, 3 times, before cutting to static. I sat frozen for a full minute, my pulse hammering in my ears. I looked around the room, the warped wood, the frost creeping across the window, and realized just how much the cabin had listened since I'd arrived. Every night, I'd spoken my name. Every night, I'd answer the radio. Every night, I'd called out into the dark. And something had been learning me. Then, from the corner of the room, a faint click, the tape player stopped. Silence. I started to exhale, shaking my head. Then a whisper slid across the back of my neck, close enough to feel the air move. Too late. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The supply room was empty, but the tape recorder had rewound itself to the beginning. The play button clicked again on its own. Ellen Lawrence's voice returned. Only this time, it wasn't her voice anymore. It was mine, repeating the same words, same cadence, same fear. It's not an animal. It mimics sound, memory, identity. The cabin lights flickered, and somewhere outside, past the frozen lake, the forest started laughing. Not one voice, but hundreds. All of them mine. At 3:12 a.m., the forest fell dead silent again. The kind of silence that feels manufactured, like the world itself was holding its breath. The frost on the windows began to melt, dripping down in slow, deliberate streaks. I knew that sign. Rule 6. My hand went instinctively to the compass hanging around my neck. For a heartbeat, it was still. Then the needle began to spin, slowly at first, then violently, whirling until it blurred. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my lungs. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the snow, just beyond the porch light. Same height, same posture, same ranger uniform. Me. It stood perfectly still, facing the cabin. My flashlight caught its eyes, or where I should have been. Just two dark, sunken pits reflecting the faint amber glow from inside. Then it moved. Not forward, not backward, tilted, like it was studying me from a wrong angle. In its hand, it held a compass. My compass. The brass glinted faintly beneath the frost. I looked down at my own, the one hanging from my neck. It was still spinning, faster, faster, until it stopped, the needle jerking upward, pointing directly toward the door. I took a single step back. The wood creaked under my boots. Outside, my reflection tilted its head in perfect sync, but in the wrong direction, opposite mine, like a mirror working on delay. Then, slowly it smiled. The slit of a mouth spread across its face, stretching impossibly wide. Frost crackled over its skin as it began to move toward the porch. The compass around my neck shattered. The cabin lights flickered. Through the walls, I could hear a dozen other voices. My voice, laughing, humming, whispering my name. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside the walls. I grabbed the flare gun from the table, hand trembling, breath sharp in my throat. Stay back, I warned. To what? I don't know. The forest? The echo? Myself? The doorknob began to turn. It wasn't forced open. It invited itself in. The air turned to ice. The thing stepped across the threshold, dragging something behind it. A tape recorder, still hissing static. It pressed play. My voice echoed from it. If you hear the laughter, bleed. I fired the flare. Light erupted. The whole room screamed. Not the air, not the wood, but the sound of 100 voices unspooling at once. And for a single second, before everything went white, I saw the figure's face clearly. It wasn't smiling anymore. It was mine. When I opened my eyes, the world was bright again. The hum of an old heater filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the frosted window. I was sitting at a desk, the HQ office in Ely. My uniform was clean. My wounds were gone. Coffee steamed beside an untouched map. A knock came at the open door. A young recruit, couldn't have been more than 20, stood there, his posture stiff, face pale but eager. "Mr. Hensley," he said, "they told me you'd be my supervisor for Outpost Epsilon. Said you'd explain the rules before I head out." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. My hand shook. Behind him, pinned neatly to the corkboard, was a fresh sheet of paper, crisp, white, and new. Outpost Epsilon, Survival Directives. 7 rules printed in black ink. But this time, there was an 8th scrawled at the bottom in handwriting I knew too well. If you wake up at HQ after a long night, don't go back. You never left the forest. My breath hitched. I looked down at the brass compass sitting on the desk. Its needle was still. Then, slowly it began to turn. Outside, the morning mist thickened, rolling against the glass. The trees beyond swayed gently, like they were breathing. And from deep within the fog came a faint, familiar sound. Laughter. Soft. Childlike. Getting closer. The compass spun faster. I realized then, I was already back.